We are populated this morning with co-hosts by the name of John and John. We're going to take advantage of those two first names in a moment with their special segment. But first, let's reintroduce them to you, the audience, whether it is on the radio, the TV, or the stream. Mr. John Gilstrap, he is a New York Times best-selling author and a retired firefighter and safety engineer. Welcome back, John.
Good morning.
He is a former member of the House of Delegates, where he served 26 years, though not concurrently, also deputy revenue...
Not consecutively.
Thank you. Not consecutively. And also served in his country in the Vietnam War, saw active combat, and was Deputy Revenue Secretary of West Virginia. Mr. John Doyle.
Good morning, everybody.
Welcome back to you. We are
lovely being here.
Produced by the sports doctor Colin McLaughlin and Kyler High as well, too. And Kyler's more or less training to take over that producer's position a couple days a week, too. So when Kyler's ready to fly solo, he shall fly.
I believe he can fly.
Solo.
Touch the sky. You used to sing. You could probably pull it off. We got a picture of Mr. Gilstrap on the Perry Como show yesterday that Colin found. He had a full beard at the time. Did you?
And it was all one color.
Yes.
and it was a different color than it is now.
It's a good beard, though, for a college-aged young man. All right, so this is the segment where we have Mr. Doyle and Mr. Gilstrap face off in a topic that each of them will choose for their own liking. Today, Mr. Doyle likes Mr. Gilstrap's topic so much, he has conceded his time for his own topic. So, Mr. Gilstrap, the pressure is on you.
All right. I want to talk about the reemergence of a new breed of cancel culture, and I'll tell you that when I first thought of this, it was before news broke yesterday, so I kind of want to break this into two parts.
News broke yesterday of what?
About the cancellation of Jimmy Kimmel's show. But I don't want to go there first. First, I want to talk about people who are being fired over their emails and kind of air this out a little bit, because we touched about it on the Friday Five.
This is in relation to the Charlie Kirk,
or specifically, but even expanding it out. What is the reasonableness of doing this? And I've given this a lot of thought. First of all, I have to say that during the times of COVID and the Me Too movement and all of this, I was a very vocal critic of the cancel culture in general. So to be true to be as a principled person, I have to say if I'm opposed to cancel culture that offends me, then I have to be opposed to cancel culture for causes that I wish people were canceled. So I put that out there, right? And I've been thinking about this. If you got an employee of the Acme Dynamite and Anvil Company, and they take a stance, an inflammatory stance on anything, whether it's Charlie Kirk or racism, or pick abortion, pick a hot topic, and he does it, or she does it, a person does it on their Acme Dynamite and Anvil Company email address.com, then I think it's entirely reasonable to fire that person because they're representing the company when they say something that they don't have the right to say. If you're representing the company, you have to be out there and say right things about the company. There are things in my book contract that specifically say that I may not disparage the publisher, which is entirely reasonable. Now, if I go onto my private email address and I'm speaking as John Gilstrap, the citizen, and I actually have an author page where my rules are different than on my. I don't think it's reasonable that somebody be fired for that. I mean, you get to vent, right? So if the employee of Acme goes on and says something that's terribly disparaging of any issue, if he's my employee, it's a right to work state, right? So he works at the pleasure. So I can fire him. It's legal to fire him, I think, except under some circumstances. But I don't think it's right to fire him. I think it's perfectly reasonable to bring him into my office and say, "Hey, George, why do you tell me why you think that he should be set on fire? Let's what kind of match are you going to use to do this?" Right? Make it as squirmy as you possibly can to make it a memorable experience. I think all that is fair, but I don't think it's reasonable to fire unless there's a doctor that's in this mix, a cardiologist or an anesthesiologist or whatever, who very publicly said something about, I don't know, I hope Trump dies or something like that. Well, okay. So now you've got an anesthesiologist in a very important position. If a patient is wearing a Trump shirt, what does that say about their ability to treat? That's an on-the-fence case. So, I don't know. What are your thoughts on this? And then we'll get to Jimmy here in a minute.
First of all, I need to offer a correction. Being a right-to-work state has nothing to do with this. All right-to-work does is banishes a certain type of union contract, called the union shop. It doesn't get into any other way. So I just wanted.
Thank you.
Now,
was he looking for at will in terms of employees who are at will? Would that be a more appropriate?
Yeah, but that's not state law.
Correct.
There's no difference between Maryland, which is a non-right to work state, and West Virginia, which is a right to work state, on something like employee firing for stating your views in public. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to start off with an anecdote, a personal anecdote. About 9 years ago, when I was Deputy Secretary of Revenue, and it was my first week on the job. There's a guy in Charleston with a name exactly like mine who writes letters to the editor. And we agree on a number of issues, but the way he writes and the way I write are entirely different. He is what I call a slasher when he writes. He likes to use negative terminology about the ideas and people with whom he disagrees. So anyway, I'm there a week, and there's this letter to the editor in the Charleston Gazette Mail criticizing the governor. I've just been hired. My boss, the Secretary of Revenue, whom I'd known for a long time, he was a former Speaker of the House when I served in there, he calls me in. He says, "You didn't write this, did you?" I said, "No." He says, "I know. The governor's office just called me up this morning, told me I had to fire you, and I told him it wasn't you." He says, "Now, I'm sure you agree with some of the things he says, but you would not have said them the way he says them." So this is before.
I remember that, by the way.
All right. This is before this idea of social media became as pervasive as it is now. We do have to get adapted to social media. I believe that. And another one. I remember back when I was studying constitutional law in college, we studied a case in Chicago where a police officer was out openly campaigning for the candidate for governor that was for mayor, that was running against the incumbent. And he got fired. And the court apparently decided that it was okay to fire him because the judge said, and the argument was that he had a constitutional right to speak his mind. And the judge said, he does have a constitutional right to speak his mind, but he does not have a constitutional right to be a police officer. So anyway, that's the bottom line. And this was before public sector unions and that sort of stuff. So anyway, I think it is okay for an employer, and John Gilstrap, in your case, I would say, yes, it is advisable to call the person in and say, you really shouldn't do this because it's stupid. But I do think the employer has a right to fire the person. Now, what we don't have, and now I'm going to bring Jimmy Kimmel in here, what we do not have in this country is a permission for the government to even imply to an employer that the employer should fire someone who said something that the government didn't like.
Okay, and let me just put this out here. I have the quote up so that we know what we're talking about. Yeah. This is there's two parts here. These are the offending quotes from Jimmy Kimmel. I'm not going to do the whole quote-unquote thing. "We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it. And then there's some narrative here that clearly the assassin was a rightist, trying to characterize him as leftist ideology. Then he went on to describe Trump's response to the assassination as how a 4-year-old mourns a goldfish, and he's fanning the flames of violence. So this is what Jimmy Kimmel was saying on the night of or the night after the assassination. So that's the offending language here. Just put it out there, but not commenting on it. That's the offending language.
Now, I think ABC has every right to fire him for that if it wishes. My problem is that their firing came after what appeared to be a threat from the government. That is where we got to draw the line. Now, let me say this about the murder of Charlie Kirk. It's appalling. It's unacceptable. I oppose political violence in any form. And I have some bona fides on this because in 1972, I was volunteering in the McGovern campaign for president in the primary, and I was running the campaign in Jefferson County. And back then, as is the case now, the West Virginia primary is 1 week before the Maryland primary. About 3 days before, as I recall, 3 days before the West Virginia primary, which would have been 10 days before the Maryland primary, George Wallace was shot while campaigning in Maryland. And he was he was a paraplegic for the rest of his life as a result of that. We immediately suspended the campaign. We publicly condemned the act and said it is fundamentally wrong. And so did the people in the Hubert Humphrey campaign. Those were the 3 candidates running in the Democratic primary at the time. It is wrong. Now, I commend Charlie Kirk for some things, particularly his belief in free speech. And I will say that the idea of the government telling ABC they should fire someone is in direct violation of Charlie Kirk's constant arguments in favor of dialogue. Say what you want. You have every right to do it. Now, one thing more, and that is, when I say it was fundamentally wrong for Charlie Kirk to be murdered, I can also say that in my view, some of the things Charlie Kirk said were bigoted. That is my opinion of some of the things that he said. That I don't think anybody should then take that and say, aha, you're saying it's okay to murder the guy. No, I never said that. It is wrong. I thought George Wallace was bigoted, but I thought it was fundamentally wrong to attack him. Not just murder, in any way physically threaten someone who says something that you believe to be beyond the pale. There.
I absolutely, I'm a free speech absolutist. I mean, there's actions have consequences, however, right? I mean, the government shall make no law that abridges free speech. So certainly if anybody tries to put Jimmy Kimmel in prison, I will lead the fight to keep that from happening. But just as the police officer does not have a right to his job, Jimmy Kimmel does not have a right to his show. Mm-hmm. According to, and this is, I'm just reading right here, I don't know what news feed it is. But according to Brendan Carr, right, the head of the FCC, Nexstar and Sinclair, whom I presume are the syndicators of his show, received unprecedented pressure from local programmers to pull the show, that they were getting so much pressure from the local stations to get rid of Jimmy Kimmel that they pulled it. And it was an ABC decision. It was not an FCC decision. Fundamental. I mean, it was ABC who pulled the show. And we can I'm not an apologist for this. I'm just saying that this is what happened. And if, in fact, it was, a lot of people are ticked off by this. And if you look at the electoral map and you see how much red is in the middle of the country and how little blue there is where the population centers are, all that red are TV stations. and our local affiliates. And it's not beyond the pale to me that there was, in fact, a lot of pressure to take this off. I don't know. But I will say that it is wrong for the government to say that what someone can and cannot say. But I also think that it's about time that high-level broadcasters, the people who actually, and let's be honest, the late-night talk show hosts are the source of news for a lot of people in the United States. That's the source of a whole nother show. I mean, how sad that is. They have a responsibility when they're doing a bit, and it's a sarcasm bit. Saturday Night Live, nobody expects. Saturday Night gets a bye because nobody expects them to do anything but their satire. On the night after, or the night of, or after, I'm not sure when this happened, it was very close to it, an assassination like this, when a great deal of the nation is mourning, to deliberately misrepresent fact is wrong. I think it's a fireable offense, not by the federal government, but it is certainly a fireable offense from ABC. And if in fact, and why, I don't know why they would lie, but if in fact this is coming from the local affiliates, from all of those people who are saying, I'm not watching this guy. This guy really offends me. I'm not watching him. You need to take him off. Then that is believable to me. I don't know. And yes, there is a merger going on. So, that's another detail.
Actually, I believe that this grassroots rebellion among local stations did take place. And which means that the head of the FCC should have kept his damn mouth shut, and Jimmy Kimmel would probably have been fired anyway. So that's and that is a problem. Also, I will defend Jimmy Kimmel only in this sense. He made that statement before it was definitive that this guy was a left-winger. This was when there was he made that statement when the reports were confusing coming out. So I still think he shouldn't have said it.
Yes.
Yeah, but that's but again, the critical thing is the government shouldn't come across like this, and particularly when Donald Trump was elected saying, we're going to defend free speech. Absolutely going to defend free speech. And I'm not sure he realizes how silly he looks now coming across.
See, now, you're making the presumption that it's not an ABC decision. This is
No. I'm not making that presumption. I'm saying
nobody went to jail on this. Free speech.
No. You're right. What I'm saying is, for the FCC to say that, and I'm agreeing with you on that, and President Trump concurring with the FCC saying that, I'm not so sure he realizes how seriously he's contradicting himself on this free speech question. That's where I was going.
Well, and also in the case of Charlie Kirk, you at one level you got to give the president a bye too, because they were very close friends. And when you watch a close friend get killed, it's like, well, why did he get Air Force 2 for the body? Because he was a really close friend. Shut up. It's just, that's the way it is. You get perks, right? Now let's go to a different level, where I'm going to get the networks wrong because I don't know who it was.
NBC is next.
This is the
That's
guy.
what they said.
This is the guy who was fired for when he was reporting live.
That was MSNBC.
MSNBC, and essentially, when you say ugly things, there are going to be ugly consequences that followed.
Matthew Dowd.
I'm sorry, when the pressure is on and you're reporting live, and this is not reporting live in the studio. This is just talking, but it is talking live, and there is a certain pressure to say the right things in the right order. If it were a pressured situation, sometimes you just the filters get out of the way and the words, they don't come out in the wrong order, but you end up saying the things you should have thought instead of saying. To be fired for those, especially when you dial it back later, I think that should be, if you got to take action, it should be more a suspension than a firing.
Well, I actually think it was proper to fire Matthew Dowd for that. I've always liked Matthew Dowd. I agree with him most of the time. But I also think that when we're on the air like this, we have a responsibility to think before we speak.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't.
Let's point out that what we're discussing right now are those under an FCC licensure, right?
That is correct.
So when you are on YouTube or other social media platforms and you're saying whatever you want to say, you're not guided by or ruled by an FCC license. And FCC licenses are very dependent upon community approval. So if the community objects to the content of the programming, then your license could be in jeopardy. It's really as simple as that. If you remember the whole Howard Stern thing back in the 90s and early 2000s in regards to content over the air waves regulated by the FCC. And then he eventually went to Sirius satellite radio, and there's no FCC licensure of that. So what happens here is a lot different than somebody who's going to go on Facebook, and every time that they post something on Facebook, you react to it, and you say, well, that's not true, and then they cancel you from posting your correction on Facebook. There is no FCC intervention there, but there is here. Okay, and that's the reason why when you are on a program, you have to be a bit more careful if the FCC has licensure.
I think it was Howard Stern. The early 80s, the Air Florida crash in D.C., where the plane took off and hit the 14th Street Bridge. I think it was Howard Stern.
It was.
Who called Air Florida and asked how much was a flight to the 14th Street Bridge.
I remember that.
One-way ticket to the 14th Street.
He got fired for that. If he had not been, would it have been appropriate for the FCC to insist he be fired?
No.
No.
No?
Never at all. Never once is it appropriate for the FCC to insist that someone be fired.
That is what the First Amendment's all about.
But the airwaves, it's different because the airwaves are owned by the public. They're our airwaves. It's not the government's airwaves, it's the public airwaves. And if the public is really offended, I mean, you do something that just really, especially in the D.C. area where it goes.
That's different.
But that's different. But that's what the FCC is. It's not a government. It's a government agency, but the airwaves are owned by the public, not by the government.
So what happens is when the next license renewal comes up, the FCC takes into consideration public complaints, and then they can determine whether they want to re-grant that license. For the FCC to say, listen, you have to fire that person who said that, that's the equivalent of the government suppressing free speech because the FCC is the government.
Can you make it a condition of getting your license back that you got to get rid of this guy?
No, but I think you can make, hey, you got to have a lot tighter controls over stuff like this. Is that the FCC could seriously legally say that. And in terms of the airwaves being owned by us, the people, they are. But anything owned by the people is administered by the government. The members of the FCC are appointed by the president with the advice and consent of the U.S. Senate. So this makes it a government operation.
And there's more hanging over this than meets the eye. You alluded to it earlier, and that is the fact that many of these media companies are merging, and they're merging in huge deals. It's the reason why 60 Minutes buckled. And it's the reason, most likely, why this whole thing happened as quickly as it did as well.
And one more reason why we got to be worried about losing competition.
Well, and that's the problem, and it was one of my favorite presidents who opened this door, and that was Ronald Reagan. It used to be that a media company could only own a certain limited number of stations across the country. And when we lifted that, we ran into a scenario where now you can make a lot of decisions based on what's best for business. Free speech be damned. End of story. And that concludes our time with John and John as well. We appreciate you two of you, I wouldn't say sparring, discussing the issue this morning. As we head to the top of the hour, this segment brought to you by the Skinner Accident and Injury Lawyers at SkinnerWins.com and the Berkeley County Health Department's Quick Response Team. This is Talk Radio, WRNR Martinsburg.